Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. So in today's video I have another piano lesson for you guys. So in the last video I taught you basic notes, how to count their beats, the staff, and the different clefs for right and left hand. In today's lesson I'll be teaching skips and steps plus some basic intervals and the different rests to match the notes that I taught in the last lesson. So without any further ado, let's jump right into the lesson. So starting off with steps. To play a step, you move to the next key, which should be the next letter after the first one you played, and using the next finger following the one you started playing with. For example, if I put my first finger from my right hand on middle C, and I want to play a step, then I would play the next key, which is D, on my second finger. So like this, C, and then D. So that is a step. On the staff, when there is a line note and you want to go a step up or a step down, you go to the very next line or space note that follows the first note you started on. So I'll put a picture of a step on the staff on the screen. So the same example that I played. So you have C and you go to the very next line or space. In this case, it's the very next space, so it would be D. Next, to play skips, you skip one key after the first one that you played, which means you also skip a letter, and the fingering is to skip a finger. So let's say I start with my second finger on D. To play a skip, I use my fourth finger and skip a key, so I play F. So if I start with my second finger on D, to play a skip, I need to skip a note in between the two and play with the third finger that follows after the first finger that I played, which is the fourth, and I play F because that is how I get a skip. So D to F is a skip, and then C to D is a step. I'm going to use intervals to demonstrate the steps and skips more in depth. So now we're going to move on to basic intervals. This is the main portion of this lesson, and it's like my main focus for today. So an interval is the distance between two notes. Again, an interval is a distance between two notes. So an easy term is skips and steps, but that only limits you to skips and steps. Interval is expanding that space between the two notes more and more and more. So therefore they're not called skips and steps anymore. That's why we call them intervals. There are 6 basic intervals that a beginner should know and that I'm going to teach you in this video. So starting from a second interval to a perfect octave, as you can see in the picture on the screen, I put all the intervals in one diagram so you can have an idea of what I'm gonna explain later on. But first I'm gonna start with the perfect unison, which is the first interval showed on the diagram. So all the intervals that I'm going to explain have a corresponding visual representation, so take screenshots when you feel the need to. The perfect unison interval is the same note repeated with no spacing between the two notes. So to play a perfect unison, you just repeat the same note twice, like this. Or even on the left hand. So just repeating a note twice is playing a perfect unison. Like I said, a perfect unison is when you play the same note twice. The same key, the same note twice with the same finger. So if I play C twice with my first finger, that's a perfect unison. Nothing changes. And that same goes for the rest of the keys or any other key or any other note. Next is the second interval, which is the second interval, which is exactly the same thing as a step, like I explained before. It is played by going only a step up or a step down from the initial key played, and there is one key separating the two notes. So let's take the first example, which is F to G. In between F and G, there is one key that separates F and G. There is one key that is in between F and G. So on the right hand, I put all the examples in treble clef just for the purpose of the video. And so if I have F and G, or I can play it on any finger, that is a second interval. That is also known as a step. As you probably noticed, there is one black key in between. So that's what I mean when there is one key separating the two notes that are being played. So this is a step, or this is a step. Now, there are not many examples on the diagram that I should give you, but I'm going to show you another one that is different but still a second. So you see how E and F, there's nothing in between it. If I were to say this is a step, that is correct, because E and F, they are two different notes. Even though there's nothing in between them on the keyboard, it's still two different notes, and there is technically a note in between them, which is E sharp and F flat. But this is also called a step. So now that you know the perfect unison and the seconds, I want to move on to the thirds. These three are some of the easiest intervals out of all the ones that I'm going to teach you today. So thirds, which is exactly the same thing as skips that I explained earlier, it is played by skipping a note and a finger going up or down on the keyboard with a third span in between the two notes. So when you want to play a third, you can simply count 3 notes away from the initial note that you played to find your third interval. Let's take the third example that I gave you and try that out. So in the third example, there is G, the note G, and it's going to the note B. From G to B, there is a 3-letter span, G, A, B. There is a 3-letter span, which is an indication of a third interval. So anytime you have 2 notes from the first and to the last note that is telling you there's a 3-letter span, that's how you can tell that it's a third interval. So I'm going to play it. So you have G and you have B. From G to B, 1, 2, 3, that is a 3-letter span, which makes it a third interval. We're going to move on to the perfect fourth interval. Now, these intervals just keep expanding as I go on and explain them. They just expand more and more. So the perfect fourth, as you can probably tell from its name, has a span of 4. And before I move on, I want to explain what the term perfect means. I also used it in perfect unison. The term perfect just means that it is an exact interval without being minor or major, which is something you'll learn later on. So a perfect fourth can also be identified as a skip plus a step. So beginners will find it easier to use skips and steps to identify these larger intervals. So a skip plus a step equals a fourth span. So let's take C and let's play a skip. A skip would be like playing C and E. So going from C to E, that would be a skip. And then plus a step, I would go E to F. So when you put it all together, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, which is a span of 4, which is a perfect fourth interval. So I'll play it again. So you have a skip, C to E, because you're skipping a finger and you're skipping a key, C to E. And then after the skip, you add a step. So E to F, that is a step. So when you put it all together, C to F gives you a perfect fourth interval. So you probably heard I was counting when I was demonstrating it. So to help you figure out these intervals, you might find it easy to count out loud and count the number of notes that should be in between the two notes that are being asked or being played. So 1, 2, 3, 4 for a perfect fourth, or 1, 2, 3 if you were to play a third. So let's take the second example on the diagram. Even though I already gave you an example, I want to give you another example just to clarify everything. So the second example on the diagram starts with the second finger on F. To play a fourth, I count 1, 2, 3, 4 to get to B. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And notice that when I count, I always count starting on the F, on the first note that is given. You don't go 1, 2, 3, because that will just mess it up. That won't give you the exact interval that you need. So you start on the F, the first note that is given, and you count 4, which should land you on B for the perfect fourth interval. 1, 2, 3, 4, like that. So this is a perfect fourth interval with a 4-letter span. Next, we're going to move on to the perfect fifth interval. A perfect fifth can also be identified as a skip plus a skip. So the perfect fourth is identified as a skip plus a step, but the perfect fifth is identified as a skip plus a skip. So 2 skips gives you a span of 5 letters, which is equivalent to a perfect fifth interval. When finding a perfect fifth, you can simply count 5 notes away from the initial note that you started with to find your perfect fifth interval. So the fourth example on the diagram shows E to A going down. So no matter which way on the keyboard that you're going, the same rules apply. Whether you're going down or up, the rules never change and the same technique applies. So you have E, so I'm going to put my fifth finger, on E, and I'll count downwards 5 keys to get to A, which should be A if you count correctly, which will give you a perfect fifth. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or you can go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Either way, there should always be a 5-letter span. And there you go. And one more thing that you probably noticed, or maybe you didn't, that the first note, if the first note on the staff is on a space, a fifth above or below it will always be a space as well. Same goes for the line notes. If the first note on your perfect fifth example is a line, the fifth above it or below it will also be a line note. Okay? So that is also something that can help you when you're trying to identify a perfect fifth interval. Last but not least, we have the octave, also known as a perfect octave or a perfect eighth. Oct, O-C-T, are the first letters in octopus and octagon. And what they have in common is the number 8. Well, octopus has 8 legs and the octagon has 8 sides, which means that an octave must have a span of 8. And you're right. So from the first initial note, you need to count 8 letters to create an octave. So if I were to go from C to C, that should give me an octave, because there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Over here is C as well. It's not really showing in the camera, but it is C, and it is an 8-letter span between these two keys. Okay, another way to tell if it's an octave is because an octave is going from one note to its very next highest or very next lowest note with the same note name. So like I was saying, C to C, that is an octave. If I go C to C, going downwards, that's an octave. If I go from A to A or A to A, that is an octave. So when you have one letter and the next highest note, which is the same note name, is an octave. So you can choose any note on the keyboard, and like example, G to G, or which is an octave. So an octave has a span of 8 letters, and it's the same note repeating, just the next highest or the next lowest. So now we've completed with the intervals portion of the lesson for now, so we'll move on to the rests. So rests. The 3 notes I taught in the last lesson were the quarter note, the half note, and the whole note. Have corresponding rests, which are pauses / moments of silence with different beat lengths in music. So I want to start off with the quarter rest. This is what a quarter rest looks like. It's kind of a funky shape, but you can never forget it when you see it. So this is a quarter rest, and the quarter rest is worth 1 beat, just like a quarter note is worth 1 beat, except a quarter note is playing and a quarter rest is pausing or taking a moment of silence. Here is a practice piece with the quarter note. I put together this practice piece so that you can practice playing and remembering to get that moment of silence when there is a rest in the music, and then continue playing again if you need to. So when you play, it might help to count out loud with numbers or sing the ta-ahs like I taught you in the last lesson. So here's how you would play the practice piece. So you start with your 3rd finger on B, and then you go to 2nd finger on C, and then 5th finger on G, and then we lift because we have a moment of 1 beat of silence. So I'm going to do that part again. So I put quarter notes as all the examples, so make sure you're playing each quarter note for 1 beat only. So ta, 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 ta. Okay, we're going to do that one more time. Ta, 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 ta. If it helps, lift your hand. Maybe, I don't know if it will help, because sometimes when you lift your hand and put it back, you might lose where your fingers are supposed to go. But remember, on that rest, make sure you don't play anything. So I'll do it 2 more times. Ta, 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 ta. One more time. Ready, go. Ta, 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 ta. Alright, there you go. Very good. So that's how the practice piece should sound like. Remember, don't play on the rests. The rests are pretty distinct, and I circle them as well, and there's no finger number on them because you don't play anything when there's a rest. Okay, so next we have the half rest. This is what it looks like. It looks kind of a lot like a top hat. So on the staff, the half rest sits on the 3rd line, and this is a permanent rule, a permanent thing for the half rest. The half rest always sits on the 3rd line. You don't put it anywhere else because then it will just be wrong. So always the half rest sits on the 3rd line on the staff. And it is worth 2 beats, just like the half note. The half note is worth 2 beats, and the half rest is worth 2 beats. Except the half note, you play 2 beats, and the half rest, you get a moment of silence for 2 beats. Here's the practice piece, again, in bass clef, with the fingerings and everything. And so this is how it should sound and look like when you play it. So we have our 5th finger on C, and we're just going to play the rhythm that I put there. So rest, rest. So play the quarter notes for only one beat, but the half rest, remember the half rest is worth 2 beats. So I'm gonna play it a couple more times. So ready, go. Rest, rest. So now I'm gonna play it while singing. Ta, 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 ta. One more time with the singing, and notice how for the quarter notes I say ta, and then when I get to the rest I say ta, because that's a singing for a half note or half rest, something that's worth 2 beats. So ta, 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 ta. One more time. Ready, go. Ta, 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 ta. Okay, good job. So finally we have the whole rest. This is what the whole rest looks like. And yes, it looks a lot like the half rest. And this may be a little bit confusing, but the whole rest is the half rest just flipped. So now instead of it being a top hat, it's an upside down top hat basically. So instead of sitting on top of the 3rd line, it hangs on the 4th line, as you can see in the practice piece that I'm gonna put on the screen just in a few moments. So it hangs off the 4th line on the staff, just above the 3rd line. And make sure when you're writing it in music, you have to make sure you always put on the correct line, because if you put on any other line, it's just gonna be wrong. It's not gonna be a whole rest or a half rest anymore. So make sure you know the difference of the half rest and the whole rest, and which line it should sit or hang from. Rest, 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 rest. Again. Rest, 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 rest. So now I'm going to add the singing. I find it's very easy. It's much easier when you're singing along, because then you can really keep your tempo steady and you don't need to worry about holding or resting for too long. Ta, 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 ta. Let's do that again. Ta, 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 ta. One more time. Ta, 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 ta. Good job. So that's it for this piano lesson. I really hope it was helpful, and I hope that you guys understood everything I was talking about. Comment if there's anything that you have questions about, and same goes for all the other videos that I've made. And also stay tuned for future videos. Like I said in the last video, I'll be explaining the first video more broken up. I already started here with the skips and steps versus the wholes and half rest, wholes and half and whole steps that I started in the first video. So this was just an in-depth explanation. So stay tuned for future videos where I explain that further. And the further along you go with my videos, the harder the stuff will get. So make sure you really practice and practice, because remember, practice makes perfect. So thank you for watching my video. Don't forget to subscribe. Please subscribe. Don't forget to like this video. Don't forget to share it. And can't wait to see you in the next one. Bye.